So I'm very pleased to be here tonight. I want to thank Dr. Ford for the invitation and Bonnie for the wonderful introduction. I'm just totally floored by the IHMC organization and everything that's accomplished here. This is a pretty well-kept secret up in Gainesville. In Gainesville, everybody thinks University of Florida is a big deal. This is a big deal. So thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy this lecture. Tonight I want to talk about springs. That's what I'm primarily interested in. But to talk about springs, I need to talk about the aquifer. And you'll understand why as I get into this. So where does the fresh water in Florida come from? It comes from rainfall. And we're blessed with a tremendous abundance of rainfall in Florida. And we're actually at a latitude that would be a desert if we were in the middle of a continent. But because the ocean is only 60 miles one way and 60 miles the other way, roughly, we're surrounded by water. We're an island, if you will. And that allows us to get a lot of rain. Without the rain, it wouldn't be La Florida. There wouldn't be flowers here. It would be a desert, literally. And so the rain we get, 50 to 60 inches a year, is about the average. But like I said, we'd be a desert if we didn't have the rain. So what does the rain do that keeps us from being a desert? It allows plants to live here. And it's called evapotranspiration. Plants have to have water to live, just like we do. They evaporate over 70% of that rainfall. So right off the top, our biggest expense for our water budget is evaporation. And that's why the state is green and lush and the land of flowers, as the Spaniards called it. And there's a little bit of that rain that actually makes it to the Floridan Aquifer. About 4 to 5 inches a year of that 50 to 60 inches makes it to the aquifer. Or 2 to 4 inches on this slide. About 5 to 6% actually makes it to the aquifer. And that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight, because that's all the income that the springs have. What does the aquifer look like? Well, this is an amazing photograph of it down by Weeki Wachee Springs. People actually go scuba diving in the aquifer. You could fly an airplane through this if you could fly an underwater airplane. These are enormous passages, and there are passages similar to this under our feet right now, under Ocklawaha, under everywhere in north central Florida. This is the aquifer that holds the water. It's limestone, and it has a tremendous capacity to hold water. If we had to build water tanks to hold this much water, it would be much more money than the whole United States spends in a year to store this water. But we have a free storage right under our feet. It's called the Floridan Aquifer. It's an amazingly large aquifer. It extends from South Carolina through much of the coastal plain of Georgia, all of Florida, into Mississippi, or Alabama and Mississippi. It's called the Floridan Aquifer because most of it is in Florida. And it actually extends out into the ocean. You can see the shelf, the coastal shelf, out both ways. That's all limestone. It's a giant limestone platform that was laid down over hundreds of millions of years. And it is porous because whenever Florida was above the sea, rainfall has a little bit of acidic nature, and it dissolves limestone. And so that limestone dissolved over a period of millions of years and formed the storage that those gentlemen were scuba diving in. And that's the Floridan Aquifer. It's not the biggest aquifer in the world by extent. The Ocklawaha Aquifer actually has a bigger land area, but in terms of volume, this is probably the largest underwater freshwater aquifer in the world. Like I said, all the water in that aquifer comes from rainfall. That's where all of it comes from. And only about 6% of rainfall makes it to the Floridan Aquifer, and that's over its extent. And there's areas where a much higher amount of the rain enters the aquifer, like in Marion County. Half of Marion County is very karst. It's an area where the limestone's near the surface, and it's very heavily dissolved. And about up to a third or almost a half of the annual rainfall will recharge the aquifer here. And that's why we have big springs in Marion County. The biggest springs in the world are in Marion County. So there's evaporation. It takes a lot of water. Okay, you know where the groundwater comes from now. It comes from rainfall and what we call recharge, which is the rain that seeps into the ground. How much is there? And this is a number you won't find on any of the Water Management District websites. The general belief is the aquifer is so big that we don't have to worry about how much we use. It's like it's limitless. Well, it turns out it's not. It's big, but it's not without limits. It's estimated that about 12 billion gallons a day of water on average recharges the Floridan aquifer, the whole aquifer. So that's just a number to remember. And there's trillions of gallons of fresh water in the Floridan aquifer. But there's a few other things you should know, and that is that the whole Floridan aquifer is underlain by salt water. It's full of salt water from about I-4 south. Nobody uses the Floridan aquifer in the southern part of the state. It's deep and it's salt water. It's not potable without a tremendous amount of treatment. It's salty along the coasts because at the coast, sea level is at sea level, and that's salt water, and that salt water is in the aquifer as well along our coast. So the freshwater part of the aquifer is what has accumulated since the last time Florida was submerged under the sea, maybe 100,000 years ago or so, and that's built up a bubble of fresh water floating on the salt water. So it's not limitless. It may be 1,000 feet thick in some places, the fresh water, but it's not without limit. And we really, it's like a checking account. I'll come back to that, but you got to look at how much water is going in to figure out how much water you can take out. So you know where the Floridan aquifer is. It's under the whole state. But that's not where the springs are. The springs are under the part of the state that's shown in brown here. It's a very large area. It's over a third of the state's area has springs. We have arguably the largest concentration of springs of any place in the world, over 1,000 artesian springs in Florida, 1,021 and counting, and there's new ones discovered all the time. They're shown by green dots on this figure. And they are concentrated in places where the aquifer is exposed at lower elevation and water can escape from the ground, basically coming out of sinkholes, which is what a spring is. A spring is just a reverse type sinkhole where water comes out rather than going in. And you see a tremendous concentration along the Swanee River, the Santa Fe River, along the Nature Coast, and then along the St. Johns River, and then all the way out to the Panhandle. So like I said, there's over 1,000 of these springs, and by the next 30 or 40 minutes, you're going to know all about them. Okay, I'm going to teach you everything I know about springs. But first, I want to start out with a case history. And this is real relevant to this audience, because it's Silver Springs. Has anybody ever been to Silver Springs in this room? Come on. Almost everybody. Okay, Silver Springs is down the road about, what, 5 miles, 6 miles? 12 miles, I don't know exactly. We're on top of the hill. The bottom of the hill is Silver Springs. It's right in the middle of the state. It's just about, Ocklawaha and Silver Springs are just about the geographic center of the state of Florida. Very important place because of that. This spring put out the highest flow of any spring that's been measured in the world for about 80 years. The highest flow, an average of 500 million gallons a day. Remember I told you there was only 12 billion gallons a day of recharge to the aquifer. This one spring was discharging 500 million gallons a day. 1/24 of all the discharge from the Floridan aquifer was coming out of this one spring. And that's why Silver Springs was the biggest tourist draw in Florida up until Disney. It was the biggest tourist attraction in Florida. And the signs went all the way to Maine that Silver Springs is 1,000 miles. Silver Springs is 580 miles. Silver Springs is 200 miles. Any of you that are old enough, the signs were everywhere that Silver Springs was your destination when you went to Florida. So a very important spring. In addition to that, we have two other large springs in Marion County, Silver Glen, which is in the forest right on Lake George, and Rainbow Springs, which is in Denellen. So you may have been to those also. Silver Springs, it's a case history, and it's an example of everything bad that's occurring with springs right now. And sorry, that's the down part of the talk. And there's going to be some more of that, unfortunately, because Silver Springs is really suffering. But Silver Springs has a great history. There are records of Silver Springs in the 1850s, when people first wrote about it. Travelers were coming down from up north. They heard about Florida, this jungle, and they came. This is after the Second Seminole War, and Florida was sort of tamed finally. And they, everybody wanted to go see Silver Springs. And so Ulysses S. Grant came here, Sidney Lanier came here, Harriet Beecher Stowe came here. They all wrote about Silver Springs. So the glass bottom boats were supposedly invented around 1878. By 1916, they started making movies here, short ones. 1924, William Ray and William Davidson purchased the land. These two gentlemen were both trying to get it from, I think Ed Carmichael was his name, and they were competing for it, and they finally made a deal with each other that we're going to open this up as an attraction. So they were the co-owners up until 1962 when ABC, American Broadcasting Company, took over. Ross Allen started his institute here in 1931, brought the Seminole Village here. I forget the date on Paradise. Paradise, somebody help me out here. Paradise Park. I don't know exactly what date that came, but that was a very important part of the attraction too, when we were in a segregated state. And then Silver Springs started sort of into a decline after ABC left. Not that early. I think in the 70s it was still quite strong. And I actually came to Silver Springs to do my doctoral research in '79, so I was very familiar with it that long ago when it was still, the ecology of it was still very healthy. And then just last year, Silver Springs attraction became part of the Silver Springs, Silver River State Park, and now it's the Silver Springs State Park. So there's a whole new part of the history of Silver Springs starting. But it's going to take, if you want it to be a good part of the history, it's going to take you folks doing something about it. So why is it important? Like I said, it had the highest flow of any spring measured in the world. It's the headwaters of the Silver River. It makes a whole river. And if you ever stand down or in your boat downstream looking upstream and you're seeing that water coming at you, where's that water coming from? So you know where it's coming from now. Where did it come from? It came from rainfall. And it recharged a big enough area to put out 500 million gallons of water a day down that river. And not only does that feed the Silver River, it feeds the Ocklawaha River. During dry periods, that's the only flow in the Ocklawaha River. There's no flow coming down from the Harris Chain of Lakes anymore during dry periods. It's just the Silver River feeds the Ocklawaha River. It has the longest history of springs, or of, springs scientific investigation. My major professor came to University of Florida in 1952 and did the first major study at Silver Springs. So we have a long baseline of what Silver Springs was like, starting in the 50s, my work in the 70s, and then there's a lot of studies that have occurred in the last 20 years. And it was an economic engine for Marion County. $60 million a year that one spring system generated for revenue. 1 million visitors a year were coming to Silver Springs in its heyday. Some of you were probably working there. And so you know a lot more about it than I do. It was heralded for its clarity. The clarity was beyond belief, and that's what attracted so many people to it. And is Bruce Mozart in the audience anywhere? Well, he's the gentleman that took these pictures. I'm sorry he's not here, but his office is still right down the road next to Silver Springs. And it was the clarity of the water that attracted the film industry, the Tarzan movies, Sea Hunt, all these wonderful things that we remember about Silver Springs. But it's suffering from our development, from our lives. We all have a footprint when we live in this world, and Silver Springs is showing that to us. In most states, like the Ocklawaha Aquifer in Nebraska and Texas and Oklahoma, you don't see it when you draw that aquifer down. There's no visible, obvious presence of that other than you have to lower your wells every few years. And they've done that. But in Silver Springs, that is our window into the aquifer. That is how we see what's going on with the aquifer. And it's not pretty what we're seeing. And that's really why I'm speaking to you tonight. It's not just here to herald how wonderful Silver Springs is, but it is to let you know how wonderful Silver Springs could be again if we decide to make it that way. It's got tremendous flow reductions, 30 to 40% reductions in flow at Silver Springs over the last, that's in the last decade compared to the previous 80 or 90 years of record. That's an enormous amount of flow for a spring. And think of the spring as a living organism, and think about somebody taking away 30% of your blood flow, how you'd feel. And maybe some of you have gone through that, had a weak heart or something, and that's how Silver Springs feels right now. The other problem at Silver Springs is we've polluted the groundwater. We've polluted it to the point where it's not only harmful to Silver Springs, but it's possibly harmful to us. And that is something I hope people will wake up and do something about. And I'll talk about what is being done, but also what more needs to be done. Without Silver Springs in its flow, the Ocklawaha River would be just stagnant during dry years, and the St. Johns River would be salty, probably all the way to Lake George without that flow. That flow is incredibly important to these rivers, and if you don't use the springs, but if you use the rivers, then that should be of importance too. One other impact of Silver Springs is Rodman Dam. It was closed in around 1968. The dam was closed as part of the ill-fated Cross-Florida Barge Canal. And it was actually, the barge canal was stopped because of the concern that that canal was going to cut through the aquifer and capture the water that was going to Silver Springs. In other words, if they had dug the last section of that canal, it could have gone right through the limestone caves that feed Silver Springs. And that was, that plus the realization, I think, that it really wasn't needed is what killed the Cross-Florida Barge Canal. But it left a lot of remnants in the state, including an incredible bridge where you can drive over the swamp forest, the Ocklawaha River, several places. But also it blocks the passage of animals up Silver River. So manatees and fish can't come up to Silver Springs the way they used to. So I'll go over these quickly. And I don't have a timekeeping device up here, so I would like, Bonnie, any kind of warning you can give me. 10 and 5 would be wonderful, thank you. I'll talk about the flow reduction first. The fact of the matter is we're all using water from the Floridan Aquifer. And the water you get from the city of Ocala, the water you get from your private well, the bottled water you're drinking, the beer you drink, all the water in North Florida, over 90% of it at least, is coming from the Floridan Aquifer. That's where it comes from. And so when we extract water from the Floridan Aquifer, we're taking it away from the springs. It's, you know, don't feel bad about it. It's just that the springs need the water too. And so the idea is if we want to have springs and we want to have rivers, we need to leave enough water in them so that they're healthy. And that's not the case right now. Like I said, 30% or more reduction in flow at Silver Springs. Well, this is for the state. The groundwater use is the green bars that are under, the population is the line of Florida. You see, this starts in 1950 and goes up to 2005. You can see that our use of groundwater has been rising. Now, there's some relief that it's not rising as much the last 2 decades. It may have leveled off in some areas, but overall it's been rising throughout this whole period. So where we didn't have problems in the 1950s, we didn't have problems in the 1960s, we've got problems now, and ever since the 1980s we've been seeing those problems at Silver Springs. These are the quantities. Remember I said the Floridan Aquifer receives about 12 billion gallons a day. We're pumping about 4 billion gallons a day from the aquifers of Florida. It's not the only aquifer, but we're pumping about 2.5 billion gallons a day from the aquifer that feeds Silver Springs and the other springs. So I'll come back to that. This is where we're pumping the most. These little pie charts are by county. And the biggest, these are just the ones in the Floridan Aquifer from Florida up to Georgia, and Georgia uses the Floridan Aquifer as well. The biggest average county use is in Polk County, 250 million gallons a day. Orange County, 249 million gallons a day. Duval, 155. Hillsborough, 151. Pasco, Lake, Volusia, Osceola, 90 million gallons a day each. Marion County, only 69 million gallons a day. That's not much compared to some of these other counties. You've got the biggest spring in the world, and so you really should have a bigger share of the water, but you don't because it's being pumped in these urban areas. In some counties, like I spoke at Gilchrist County the other day, 9 million gallons a day is all they pump, and their springs are down by 40%. So what's happening? The groundwater is like a checkbook. It's like a savings account. It's like your account that you draw off of for your life. There's income, and that's that recharge from rainfall. There's expense, and before people started pumping groundwater, which is only a little less than 150 years ago did we start pumping groundwater, the total expense on the Floridan Aquifer was the overflow to the springs. That's where all the aquifer water went in the past before we started pumping it. And then there's the storage in the aquifer. Well, it's full. It's 1,000 feet thick in some places. It's trillions of gallons of money in our checking account. But when income and expense don't match, you start having problems. So pre-development, that water was all going to good use. That water was going to this pristine jungle state that the Spaniards came and took away from the Native Americans. And it was quite a rich place for fish and wildlife at that time. Well, the checking account is out of balance now. We're withdrawing more water. Well, all the water we withdraw is in direct competition with the springs. So what's happening is the total amount coming out of the aquifer is much higher now than it was in the past. It's a significantly higher amount, so that the aquifer levels are declining. The balance in the checking account is going down. And like I said, if we were in Oklahoma and didn't have springs, we would hardly notice it. We just have to put our wells down deeper, and we might have another 1,000 years of free water in Florida. But that's not the case, because it's significant enough now that the springs, which draw their water right off the top of the aquifer, are the first ones to suffer. They're like wells, but they're much higher than our wells that we dig in the ground. And this is the groundwater levels. They fluctuate year to year. Remember, recharge is where the water comes from, and it rains different amounts every year. I've just been giving you averages. So it fluctuates, but it's been on a downward trend for as long as we've been measuring groundwater levels in Florida. In fact, the average trend in North Florida in the area of the springs is about 2 inches a year. The aquifer is going down. Well, that doesn't sound like much. You know, it's 1,000 feet thick. Well, that's about 350 million gallons a day less water in the aquifer. Every day, we're taking another 350 million gallons out of our checking account. That sort of sounds like a little bit more. It's actually quite a bit of water. A lot of people can live on that much water. And the areas where the highest pumping is, for example, the Jacksonville area, groundwater levels have been drawn down by 20 to 60 feet. They have no springs in Jacksonville. They have Green Cove Springs near Jacksonville, but they have no springs in Jacksonville. They have no recharge in Jacksonville. None of the water they withdraw from the aquifer ever makes it back to the aquifer, because they have 100 feet of confining layers of clays that keep the water from recharging there. So they're withdrawing about 150 million gallons a day and putting nothing back in the aquifer. Southwest Florida, Polk County, Hillsborough County, 20 up to 90 feet of drawdown in the Floridan Aquifer. These are average numbers from pre-development to about 2005, I think it is, or 2000. Right in the middle of the state, and Orlando is another one, it's 10 to 34 feet of drawdown in the Orlando area and increasing. And right in the middle of the state is Silver Springs and Rainbow Springs. Those lines around the springs are the areas that recharge those springs. And there's a drawdown here too, about 4 to 20 feet of drawdown in the wells that are in Marion County. That's a lot of water when you have a spring that can put out 500 million gallons a day. A few feet of drop makes all the difference in the world, and it's because the springs take water off the top of the aquifer. They're an early warning system that we're depleting our aquifer. If we didn't have the springs, we might not know it. We might not care. But we do have the springs. Ocklawaha has a great spring. And the aquifer's thick, but all you have to do is pull it down 10 to 20 feet more and Silver Springs will stop flowing. Maybe as little as 15 more feet, Silver Springs will stop flowing. If we go on the trends that we're on now, we could have Silver Springs have no flow at all within 15, 20, 25 years. It's possible. And this is what happens when that happens to a spring. This is White Sulphur Springs up off of I-75 in North Florida. It was an early tourist attraction too. It was vying for Silver Springs because it was closer to Georgia. Flagler even went there and got the idea about building his railroad. There were 8 hotels there at one time. This is the Spring House in the 1920s. That was the Spring House a couple years ago. It stopped flowing regularly in the 1960s. A spring is just a hole in the ground. When you buy a spring, you buy a hole in the ground. You don't buy the water. The water's coming from this vast area of land that's recharging the aquifer. For Silver Springs, it's 1,300 square miles. That includes a large part of Marion County. It extends into Alachua County and down into Sumter and Lake counties. It's a very large area, and when you buy a spring, you don't preserve that water, not unless you put limits on how much water is being withdrawn from that aquifer. So here's the actual flow numbers for Silver Springs and Rainbow Springs. And they, the annual values are the little noisy lines. And Silver Springs was averaging around 800 cubic feet per second, which is 500 million gallons a day for most of its history. Until the late 1960s, it started coming down, and it's been going down ever since on average. The dark lines are the average plots through these annual points. Silver Springs was always about 40 or 50 million gallons a day bigger than Rainbow Springs until the 1980s. And then it started switching. And you see Rainbow is going down too, but not as much as Silver. So now Silver crossed Rainbow in the 1990s and became the second largest spring. If you're in competition with Denellen, you should be riled right now. I'm riled. And the reason is Silver Springs is about 10 to 12 feet higher than Rainbow Springs. So as the aquifer gets drawn down, which spring's going to go dry first? The one that's highest on the bucket, the one that's closest to the water level in the bucket. And that's Silver. And that's why I make such dire predictions that I certainly hope don't come to pass in my lifetime, that Silver Springs stops flowing. You go out there today and you say, can't. But this has been a nice wet year, and you get a dry year, and you continue to pull the aquifer down, and it will, just like White Springs did and other springs are doing. Silver Springs has lost somewhere around 230 million gallons a day of its 500 MGD flow on average. It's an incredible amount of water. All of Marion County is only pumping less than 70 million gallons a day. So where's that happening? What's going on? Well, it's happening everywhere. The Floridan Aquifer is this giant plumbing system that goes from coast to coast and goes the whole length of the state. So wherever you pump, you're pulling water from everywhere else in the aquifer. It's an interconnected aquifer. That's why it's got one name, the Floridan Aquifer. And they talk about an upper and a lower Floridan aquifer. The reason they're both called the Floridan Aquifer is because they're connected. There's a confining layer of sorts between the upper part of the Floridan Aquifer and the lower part of it. But it's perforated a lot, and there's lots of areas where water exchanges. So there's really one Floridan Aquifer, and wherever you pump, you have an effect on levels everywhere else in the Floridan Aquifer. And your personal effects are de minimis. You can't see them. But when you start talking about cities and very large agricultural operations, they become significant. And they can draw people's wells down in the local area to the point where they don't produce water anymore. If you add up just the pumping in these counties, which the Silver Springs Springshed includes parts of all these counties, well, not all of them. Silver and Rainbow include parts of these. The pumping just since 1965 has increased from about 200 to 471 million gallons a day. So we lost 300 million gallons a day of flow from Silver and Rainbow. Where did it go? Well, it went to these other counties too. It's going to the points of extraction. It's going to the places where I showed the aquifer levels are being drawn down. What you have is, this is a big plumbing system that's transferring water to where it's being used. And especially areas where it's used and there's no recharge, like the Northeast Florida area. They're unintentional transfers of water. But it's not magic when you pull water out of a well. It has to come from somewhere. It comes from storage, or it comes from recharge. So just to show you that this isn't just Silver, I'm out of the Silver case history now. It's happening at Ocklawaha and Rock Springs. These are the springs next to Orlando. And you can see the average discharge numbers have declined in the order of 30% in these two springs. And there's actually regulatory limits that say you're not allowed to go below those dashed lines. And the district is still in denial that we're below those dashed lines, because their model says we're not below the lines. If you look at the data, we're below the lines. So nothing's being done yet other than to say that we're going to run out of water in the Orlando area in the next 20 to 30 years. That's what they're saying. We already ran out of water in Orlando. It happened a while ago. These are just the amount of spring flow decline in all the different water management districts. I don't expect you to remember this, no test. Swanee River has 314 springs, that's SR. 314 log springs. Northwest Florida, 318. Southwest Florida, 238. St. John's, which is the district we're in here, 151. A total, like I said, of 1,000, over 1,000. The flow declines are greatest in the areas of greatest recharge. And that is the Swanee River Basin, where the spring flows have gone down almost 50%. The average flows have gone down almost 50%. During a dry year, you can step across the Swanee River without getting your feet wet up by White Springs. in St. John's district, which is the area that we're in here, in the whole St. John's River drainage, the spring flows average declines over 20%. And we know from the science that's been done by the water management districts that a flow decline as little as 4 or 5% and maybe as much as 15% causes significant harm in springs. That's their science. And yet, these are the kinds of flow declines we have. Overall, all the springs in Florida are flowing about 30% less than they did historically. So that's just the first part of the problem. If you like water and a green lawn, you know, there's two parts of this problem, unfortunately. And I don't know how I'm doing on time. Anybody want to give me a warning? What time we got?
6:33.
Oh, good. We use nitrogen in our lives. We use nitrogen that was never used in the past because it's very inexpensive to generate as long as electricity is cheap. We make a lot of nitrogen because it really makes plants grow well. Nitrogen is great stuff. But unfortunately, when you put it on the ground in these areas of karst vulnerability, the aquifer is very vulnerable, and a large part of that nitrogen goes directly into the aquifer, which is the water we drink. Right? Same water we drink. Well, is there an effect of that? Well, there could be. Roughly in agricultural areas and in your urban yards, the recommended fertilization rates are about 200 pounds of nitrogen, of actual elemental nitrogen. The fertilizer use is much greater than that. It's about 10 times higher, but because nitrogen is usually about 10%, but about 200 pounds per acre per year. And rainfall has nitrogen in it. In fact, that's the natural way the plants were fertilized in Florida. Remember, they were green before we got here. About 3 pounds per acre per year. So this is a high amount of nitrogen. And the reason we see elevated nitrogen in the groundwater is because we're loading it with fertilizer and other things. So this is a map that shows Ocklawaha and Silver Springs, and it shows the area around what we call the spring shed. It's not a watershed, it's a spring shed. It's the area of groundwater that contributes flow to Silver Springs. It's about 1,300 square miles when you look at the maximum extent of that spring shed during really wet times. It's smaller than that now because, like I said, the water is being pulled away to these areas of high pumping, and the spring shed shrinks, and that's why Silver Springs has got less flow now. But it includes all these counties that I talked about. It's a very large area. So everything that happens on the land in this area has the ability to affect Silver Springs, the water quality at Silver Springs, and it is. The DEP and the Springs Institute just estimated the loads. This is our estimates. And you can see the proportion, about 51% of the nitrogen coming into Silver Springs is from fertilizer. 24% is from septic tanks. 15% is from rainfall, natural rainfall and recharge. And then wastewater disposal and stormwater are only about 10%. So if you want to make a difference on nitrate contamination in Silver Springs, you better pick on fertilizer some. And I'm going to talk to you about that when I get to the solutions. It's the biggest contribution, not just to Silver Springs, but most of the springs in the state. So what's so bad about nitrate? Well, this is a map of the groundwater in Florida up from 2000 to 2004. And the blue is very low concentrations. These are milligrams per liter, which is the same as parts per million of nitrate as nitrogen. The blue is the background. All of Florida had low nitrate levels in the groundwater. By 2000, 2004, we contaminated over 30% of the Floridan Aquifer and the groundwater with a concentration of nitrate that's considered harmful to springs. The Department of Environmental Protection has established a number of 0.35 as the safe level for springs. The historic level was less than 0.05, so this is still 7 times higher or more than what they naturally have, but maybe it's okay. 18% of the whole state is above 1 milligram per liter. Well, go to Marion County and look at the numbers. And there's no red in Marion County. Well, there's probably a little bit, but the orange is all above 1 part per million. And you see the whole western half of Marion County is pretty highly contaminated with nitrate. And Silver Springs is right on the edge of that area. This is a separate map made with a totally different data set. These are from drinking water wells in Marion County. About 350 drinking water wells in Marion County. They have to report their nitrate levels to DEP every year. The water quality standard is 10. That's the drinking water standard. The spring standard is 0.35, much, much less than 10. And the blue areas on this map are the areas where there's no contamination of the aquifer from nitrate. But all the other areas are contaminated at levels that are harmful to springs and possibly harmful to people. The brown, the really dark brown areas, some of them are over 13 milligrams per liter. The drinking water standard is 10. Usually there's no notification of this. These are the wells that are at gas stations, daycare centers, schools. These are wells that serve trailer parks and small developments, as well as the big city wells are all on here. And I got a blow up of this, so if you can find your house on that map of Ocklawaha, you can at least find Silver Springs. It's the end of that squiggly blue line. It's under those 3 dots there that have, a concentration between 0.36 and 1.72. Silver Springs is putting out nitrate levels over 1.5 right now. It has been for years. And that's not above the drinking water standard, okay? The aquifer is safe. We can drink it. But it's been found that nitrate may be chronically toxic by causing cancer at much lower levels. And there's a lot of reticence to change the drinking water standard because of the impact that's going to have on people, agriculture, and people with yards. So there's a study, several studies that have been published that indicate an increased risk of cancer with nitrate levels at the levels that you have in Marion County right now. Not just methylglobinemia, which is bad enough, that's blue baby syndrome at real high levels, but actual carcinogenic forms of nitrate form at these lower concentrations. Silver Springs, the nitrate coming out of that spring, the nitrogen coming out of the spring in the 1950s was 47 tons per year of nitrogen, and that was mostly being contributed by rainfall. It's over 500 tons per year now. And the study that was done by the St. Johns River Water Management District indicated it'd be over 800 tons per year if we continue developing Marion County and Ocklawaha the way we are right now. So that's the increase you can see. And those are the actual concentrations on that map. The red line is the safe number for springs. And you can see we're way above that now. And so what the state has done is said, we're way above that number. Darn, why didn't we realize that? We've been above that number, of course, since, can you see what year that is? 1960 or 1970 or something like that. We've been above that number for a long time. But we didn't have a number until last year when the state finally developed a numeric standard for surface water for nitrate. So we're way above it now. The state says, oh, we got a plan, and it's being worked on right now, and it says we got to reduce the nitrogen load by 79%. Okay. That's what Silver Springs looked like last year. The photo on the left is from 1990. The photo on the right is 2013. That's Silver River. That's what the Silver River looked like. It's turning green, folks. I was at the head spring the week before last, and it's green. The deepest places still look blue, and when we have the most rain, it looks blue. But actually, Half Mile Creek is putting in dirty water now. Every time we have a rain event, there's brown water coming into the Silver River. And that's scary. That's really scary. That means that we don't have enough fresh, clean groundwater to dilute the polluted water that's coming into Silver Springs. And that's what you see. So the last problem is the Rodman Dam. This is the easiest one. I know there's a lot of divisiveness about the fate of that dam. People have been trying to get it removed for 40 years now, but it will eventually go. It costs money to maintain it. It's on National Forest Service land, and they've told the state to remove it, but there's politics involved, and it's really caused some problems at Silver Springs. So that actually, when I did my doctoral research at Silver Springs, the fish populations were 60% less at that time than they were before the dam was put in. And that was affecting the productivity of the system. This is what the fish look like over at Silver Glen Springs. These are striped bass. And there were striped bass in the Silver River historically before the Rodman Dam. But now, based on the latest study, the one the district did, the fish population reduction is 90%, over 90%. So I don't know if you've noticed that, especially new people to the area say, God, Silver Springs is beautiful. What are you talking about? Well, you got to look at the historic baseline. It's not what it was at all. And it still could be that. So the dam is way up north. It could be removed. There's 23 springs that were drowned when that river was flooded. And it's just like dams everywhere. There's people for them, there's people against them. But this one is not serving any purpose other than bass fishing. And what I'd like to see is let's put a great state-of-the-art bass fishing tournament location out in the St. Johns River and return the Rodman Reservoir to something else, a river again. Anyway, that's just my opinion. Could be controversial. But the effects at Silver Springs are increasing algae, and I didn't even talk about that, but this is what it looks like. Reduced native plants, impaired water quality, less fish and wildlife, and the aesthetics aren't the same. It doesn't draw people because it doesn't look as good as it used to. It's not as crystal clear, and where you can see down, you see the green plants on the bottom. They don't reflect the light like the shells and the sand used to do. When it looks so bright, it just looked like a gem when you would be out there on a sunny day. And it's not supporting the life it used to support. These springs are full of animals when they're healthy, and silver is not healthy anymore. It's not supporting the recreation it used to, but I think we're going to be Silver Springs State Park with the access of kayaking at the head springs, amazing addition there. It's really going to be a great addition because people that don't want to paddle up from Ray's Landing now can paddle down and drift with the current. And once they get a good shuttle system going, that place Silver River is going to be used a lot for paddle sports. But it's not going to be good for diving, and it's not going to be as clear as it was, and you're not going to see the wildlife you would have seen in the past. The state is taking this very seriously. They're developing minimum flows for Silver Springs. They started in 2001. What's that, 13 years ago? They still haven't finished it. Their models told them that their research told them that they can only allow a 4.4% reduction in flows at Silver Springs before it would be harmed. It's over 30% reduction. Well, we think that's being caused by other things, not pumping. So that's what the district's formal statement is right now. In addition to that, they said maybe we can give out 1 or 2 more permits. And you know, Adina was looking for a permit of 1.5 million gallons a day. And there was about that much water left in their modeling. Well, then they came back and said, oh, we're going to have to deny that permit. We just checked our model and we made a mistake. We're 30 million gallons a day in the hole. And that's what they're saying now, but the governing board is going to make a decision in January whether or not to give that permit. So that's how good minimum flows and levels are. DEP is doing the water quality end of things, and so these two processes are totally independent from each other, which doesn't make sense to anybody that's trying to manage something. You don't divide it up into little pieces and don't talk to each other. But they've said that there needs to be a 79% reduction in nitrogen. And they're doing that without really any ability to control agriculture. And that's where a large part of the nitrogen is coming from. And with no willingness to ask people to fertilize, less. And it won't happen without some great cutbacks in nitrogen fertilizer use. So what needs to be done? This is my life right now. I'm writing restoration plans for springs, and I'm trying to bridge the gaps that are in the state system. I'm combining flows with water quality, with our physical impairments like dams and seawalls and things like that, just trying to come up with a holistic picture of what's causing the problems we see and just how much we can dial those back through sensible, cost-effective mechanisms. And so I've done that for Silver Springs. The restoration plan's on the Springs Institute website if you want to see it. We may even have brought some here. I don't know if we did, but you can get it. And we need to reduce the groundwater consumption that's affecting it, which is all of North Florida, not just Marion County's groundwater consumption. We need to greatly reduce our fertilizer use, and we need to remove the Rodman Dam. Those are the 3 things that could bring Silver Springs back in our lifetimes. And they can all be done. They can all be done. We can go to other sources of water. We still have surface water, about somewhere around 50 billion gallons a day of water runs to the coast. That's not spring water. So we have a lot of rain in Florida, and we don't have to fertilize lawns. That you can actually have plants without fertilizer. Like I said, rainfall is full of it. And the Rodman, like I said, it's serving a small group of people, very vocal, but I think we can even mitigate for that and give them something that they can use instead. What you can do individually is be conscientious of your water use. Remember, every glass of water you take, every bottle of water you take is 1 less glass or bottle of water that will be coming out of Silver Springs. roughly, approximately. You put some back, but not a high percentage of it gets back to the aquifer. So use water sparingly. Grow Florida-friendly plants. If you've got a yard, reduce it. Cut it in half. Cut it to a fourth. Why have such a big yard? It just costs you money. Encourage your family and friends to use less water. And really, you shouldn't water your lawn at all in this state. So, I mean, I know that's really extreme. So, but that's really would be a great solution. Actually, if everybody stopped watering their lawns, we'd save about a fourth of the groundwater that we're using right now. About a fourth of the groundwater that we're pumping is being used for outdoor water uses, other than drinking or growing plants and crops. I mean, edible plants. In fact, sod, I understand, is the biggest crop in Florida now. And so sod kills you when you're growing it because you put fertilizer on it. It kills you again when you grow it in your yard because you put fertilizer and water on it. So anyway, fertilizer is great in a garden. It's great in, containers, but it's not great if you're living on sandy soils right over the limestone. You're losing a large part of it into the groundwater. And there's things you can do. You can use slow-release fertilizer. You can not fertilize before it rains. You don't want to just water the hell out of your lawn after you've just fertilized because that rinses it down past the root zone. And it goes to the aquifer. You're fertilizing Silver Springs. 500 tons a year of nitrogen is coming out of Silver Springs. That's like somebody backing up truckloads of fertilizer to the head spring and just dumping them in. And we talk about stormwater projects and drainage wells. They're trivial compared to the amount of fertilizer, nitrogen that's going in. So you're the public. You're the people that should care about these things. I think you are the people that do care about these things, and you came tonight partly for that reason. You might not have known you were going to get such a sermon, and I apologize for that. But this is a sermon that's important to me. I live in Central Florida. I don't live in Ocala. I'm one of those non-natives from Gainesville. But my wife is from Ocala, so I'm proud of her. And that's enough for me. And I've loved Silver Springs since I first went there in 1953, when it was just a different place. My grandparents took me there. And I want to see it. I want to see it come back. I want to see it become the economic engine for Marion County again. And I think we can get there. I really think we can, because the public can make things happen. And this is Margaret Mead's quote: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And you are fortunate to have, and this is really self-promotion, you're fortunate to have an active group in this city called the Silver Springs Alliance that has woken up and is trying to bring people together to understand these issues. And it's self-serving because I'm currently the president of it. And I would love it if we had another 20 volunteers for president, because I'm also the president of the Florida Springs Institute, and I'm trying to do this over 1,000 springs in Florida right now. So if anybody wants to join, see me or Lisa Saup over there. But that's their logo down there by Rob Smith. There are people that care passionately about Silver Springs, and there are people that are going to do something about it. And it's going to happen. And this is just you saw some of our billboards. This one was up here in Ocala for a while. The Springs Institute is glad to be representing the Springs and trying to use the best science to come up with how we're going to manage our springs in the area that affect our springs so that they really have a beautiful future and not a degraded one. So thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Okay. Okay. I understand. I can take a few questions. How much time do we have for questions? 10 minutes. Wow. And if you'll raise your hand, I will call on you. And then you need a microphone. Yes, sir.
I don't know where
you can wait for the microphone, please. You may be recorded.
Yeah. You showed the picture of the sources of nitrogen, and it was on-site waste. That's septic tanks, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so here again, we keep allowing more and more septic tanks, and
wrong direction.
Yeah,
okay, well, I agree with that. I think there's over 70,000 septic tanks in Marion County.
Yeah.
70,000? 80,000? Where's that water going? Everybody knows now. It's going to the Floridan Aquifer. It is going to our drinking water. Do you want to be drinking your neighbor's water? Well, we can do better than septic tanks. So, yes, if we're going to turn this around, we need to start today. You know, it would have been nice if we started 25 years ago. But if we're going to turn this around, we should not be allowing more septic tanks. They're a problem. They're a big problem. We should not be allowing more consumptive use permits. They're a problem. We need to be reducing the amount of groundwater we're pumping and the amount of sewage we're putting into the aquifer. Yes, sir, over here. Here's one.
Great. Yeah, I was just curious what the cost of desalination is, whether it's reverse osmosis or otherwise, and just curious, as oil gets cheaper, everybody uses more, okay? So, and as water gets more expensive, they'll use less. When will the two meet, the cost of desalination to where we'll use it because it's there? Mm-hmm. We just have to pay for it.
Yeah, we do have to pay for it. It's probably about 100 times more than using the groundwater, which is, like I said, free and the purest water we can get. It's very much more expensive. And this dip in fossil fuel prices is temporary. I mean, I'm sure of that. And so desalinization is going to become very unrealistic sometime in the future. I don't know when. It's going to be very unrealistic. Florida will not be colonized the way it is now if we have to desalinate our water at a time when energy, say, is 10 times more expensive than it is now. It's just too expensive. It's a waste of energy. It's much better to conserve and use less water that we have right now. That doesn't mean we have to stop watering our plants or our gardens. We can do rain barrels, we can have cisterns, we can do all sorts of smart things that use that part of rain that runs off anyway and doesn't really recharge the aquifer. So desalinization is not a panacea. Those are expensive places to live, like in the Keys. And our wells are going salty along the coast, folks, if you haven't noticed. They're going salty at a pretty high rate of change right now. This lady up here.
Yes, Bob. You know, what you really need to do is talk to get every HOA president of every development in Florida, and had to be required to come and get these facts, because when I take my clients out on the river, and they all come from the villages or other places where they are forced to have green lawns. They are forced to fertilize. It's the people in charge of those areas that aren't getting the message. So they are the ones that have to be taught. So how do we do that? I mean, you're a great...
I would love a volunteer. How many HOAs are in Florida? Who's got that number handy? There's a lot of them, and I'm sure they all get together at some kind of association of HOAs. I'd be glad to talk to them, but obviously I'm not the only voice in the room, so everybody needs to stand up to their HOA if they see that it's going the wrong direction. I didn't use the V word tonight. Yeah, somebody used it. I didn't use it. But, you know, intensive development, and especially when people are using as much as 300 gallons per person per day, is the wrong direction. It's the wrong direction. We need to cut back and probably not develop those areas that are most vulnerable. We need to set those areas aside. And one of the great things about Silver Springs is, in the area around it, is there's a lot of land that has been set aside, but it's not enough to protect the spring. That's the message here. It's going to take a lot more than that. And actually, I hope Frank Stronach's in the room somewhere, because, or Belinda, his daughter, because if he's put together 30,000 acres in Marion County, if he would just donate those to the Springs Protection, that'd be the best thing that could happen around here. Oh, he is here. No, I'm sorry. Is that Frank in the back there? Yeah, yes, sir. Can he have a microphone, please?
In your opinion, to what extent is a freshwater lake, such as Lake Weir, how is it impacted by the groundwater pumping you've described?
All waters are connected. Okay, that's a trite phrase, but it's true. And so our lakes in Florida have connections to our groundwater. And some of our lakes, there's nothing that separates the surface water from the groundwater except sand. And those lakes are most vulnerable to be drawn down when the aquifer is drawn down. The Keystone Heights lakes are a case in point. Very, very strongly connected to the aquifer. Lake Weir is intermediate. Lake Santa Fe, almost no connection. And that's why it stays full whenever it rains a lot. And Lake Weir gets pretty full too. The connection is variable. It just depends on the geology and the soils. So, but even those lakes that are not well connected, and they lose more water when the aquifer is drawn down. It's just physics that when you separate those water levels from each other, you get more of a driving force when the aquifer level is drawn down. And it's true for the upper and lower Floridan too. If we start pumping the lower Floridan, which has been discussed here in Marion County and for the city of Ocala, what that does is it creates a greater gradient for the upper Floridan to go through those confining layers to the lower Floridan. And so it's really, all the water's connected. And we should just understand that and use it accordingly. And to, what do we really want? I mean, if we want more jobs, more development, more green lawns, then we should just keep pumping. But we won't have springs. And we won't have the rivers that we're used to. So you give up something if you do that.
We have time for one more question.
Go ahead, right there.
Aren't we also seeing that sinkholes are a byproduct of all of this as well? We're seeing an awfully large increase in those that we're finding now.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry I didn't have time to go over all the geology of Florida, but lower groundwater levels lead to a higher rate of sinkhole formation. Especially, you know, you get lower groundwater levels during drier periods. There's less recharge, and pumping goes up. It exacerbates the groundwater level issue. But when it rains following a period of aquifer drawdown, the ground becomes saturated and becomes much heavier. And of course, like I said, there's cavities, caverns under all these lakes and developments and everything, and they cave in occasionally because the roof is not thick enough to support the load. So yes, when they, for the strawberry freeze in 2011 or 12? 11? The big freeze over in Plant City, they drew the aquifer down about 60 to 80 feet overnight to try to do freeze protection on the strawberries. They got a special dispensation from the Southwest Florida Water Management District. There were over 160 sinkholes formed within days of that event. So there's no doubt that the two are related. But not every sinkhole is related to, you know, pumping. They're related to aquifer levels, that's for sure.
Well, let's thank our speaker for tonight.